So we can start now.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I am Supriyo Chakraborty from Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, and this is the 27th MOES Ovenia series. I would like to talk in this morning about the paleoclimate and how we use the paleoclimatic investigation in order to understand the past climate and in the Indian context, basically the monsoon variability. But before that, I would like to thank Honorary Secretary Dr. Rajivan and Dr. Gopal for giving me this opportunity to deliver this talk. And I also like to thank our director and Dr. R. Krishnan of IITM for providing help and support in my all this work that I have been doing. And also I like to thank my colleagues who have supported me for doing this work and to make this today's presentations. So I would like to show my presentations. Application, right? Okay. Yeah. Share. Application. Share. So this is the topic of today's lecture, the paleoclimatic study of the Indian summer monsoon variability. This figure shows a schematic representation of Indian monsoon rainfall variability based on the instrumental records, which is available approximately for the last 150 years. What is seen here is that the rainfall experiences above normal rainfall, and sometimes it experiences below normal rainfall, which is represented by these plots. So if we plot in average variability, we can see that rainfall varied. Sometimes it was higher than normal and it was below the normal, which is represented by the peaks and troughs. So that means that rainfall has a natural mode of variability. In fact, there are several modes of variability, and the short-term variability or the high-frequency variability can be obtained based on the instrumental records. But what about the low-frequency variability, which may be occurring at decadal to multi-decadal, even on centennial timescales? So based on this instrumental record, this is not possible to decipher about those variabilities which is taking place at multi-decadal to centennial timescales. So to address these questions, the paleoclimatologists, they rely on natural archives which respond to rainfall variability, and in turn they record this variability by means of different parameters like their elemental ratio, isotopic ratios, or various kind of other means. So here I would like to describe how we can use the tools, different kind of tools, to investigate the past climatic variability, and how we can get information on larger time scales rather than on local time scales, and how different proxies agree or disagree in their reconstructions. So climate proxies are defined. There are mainly two kind of proxies. One is called biotic proxy, another is called geological or geochemical proxies. So biotic proxies, they consist of plants and animals group, and they respond to different climatic parameters. Similarly, geological and geochemical proxies, they represent the mass movements of Earth's materials through the climate system, either directly or by some chemicals changes. So the biotic proxies, they consist of plant fossil, spores and pollen, plankton, cocolis, diatom, etc. And the parameters which are measured are morphology, pollen count, stomatal index or density, ring width, physical property, elemental ratio, and isotopic ratios. I would like to focus my talk mainly on these two aspects, the ring width analysis and the isotopic ratios of some kind of proxies that are sensitive to rainfall variability. The dendrochronology is a science which means the study of trees, and chrono means time. So we know that there are certain trees which forms annual rings, and these rings can be dated relatively easily compared to many other proxies, and so this is an advantage in which tree ring studies offer. And there are other advantages like their continuous records are available and they have widespread distributions. So the rings are first assigned their years, and then climatic information is extracted by studying either ring width or isotopic compositions. Density is also measured, which is also sensitive to some climatic parameters. This map shows the tree ring network in India. Several tree ring cores have been collected from northern Indian region, which are sensitive to North Indian climatic events, and this belongs to the central Indian location, and several cores have also been collected from the peninsular Indian regions, which have been used by several dendroclimatologists to infer about past climatic changes. Generally, in the Indian context, tree ring provides information approximately for the last few hundred years up to about 1,000 years, because the longer lived tree rings are rarely available, and hence it is limited to up to few hundreds of years. This is example of increment borer, which is used to extract cores from the tree stem. This is an example of tree ring width index, which has been reconstructed based on several tree ring analyses from high altitude Himalayan region. This red line indicates a 30-year smoothing line, which is actually representing the temperature variation in this region. Generally, tree ring width is very sensitive to temperature. In a conducive year, when growth is optimum, the ring width will also be optimum. But in a stressed year, the year which is experiencing warming conditions, the ring width will vary accordingly. So in this case, when this is calibrated, the ring width index is calibrated with the instrumental temperature, then a linear equation is formed. And when this equation is extended to the past, when instrumental record is not available, in principle, the warming and cooling events can be identified, which is shown in this record. So these cooling events is believed to be related to the fluctuations of glacial events in this region. This is another treating record which is also taken from the Western Himalaya, and the reconstruction of temperature is provided almost for the last 1,000 years. And one interesting feature is that over this long time scale, the temperature in this region shows a declining trend, as shown in this red line, which represents a 50-year low-pass filtered line. After detendering, this treating index has been used to reconstruct the monsoon rainfall variability, which is shown in this plot, and we see that the summer monsoon temperature and the summer temperature show a strong covariation. This is another example of temperature reconstruction based on readings collected from Sikkim region. Several rings have been analyzed and an index has been prepared, which has been used to reconstruct the temperature of this region. This record shows spanning in a time span of last approximately 300 years, and over this time span the temperature has shown a declining trend, which is evident in this green line. But if we consider the last 150 year, temperature shows an increasing trend, which is shown here as a red line. And the extreme temperature events have been identified, which is mentioned in here, and also the colder cooling events also identified, which is mentioned here. Now another reading record is shown, which represents the climate of the southern Indian peninsular region. These several reading samples are collected from Kerala, and an index was formed. And this green, this purple boxes represents the low growth rate. And when this portion is zoomed, for example, 1870 to approximately 2000, so what we see here is all the low growth years represented by these red circles, they match very well with the drought years. This is rainfall anomaly for the same time period, and we see that there is almost 1-to-1 match between the low growth years and the drought years. That is, during the stressed conditions, ring width becomes narrower, and hence the ENSO related drought years have been manifested in the ring width index. So treating in this region provides a good record about the ENSO variability. Now I would like to discuss how we can use the isotopic studies to infer climatic informations. This is the basics of isotopes, where we see that oxygen isotope, which consists of 8 protons and 8 neutrons, which makes mass about 16 O. Oxygen 16, mass 16. And there is another isotope which consists of 8 protons and 10 neutrons. So in this case, mass is slightly higher, 18 O. And because of this mass difference, some physical characteristics differ. For example, this figure shows water molecule which consists of minor isotope, that is 1H, another 1H and 16O. But this molecule consists of 1H, 1H and 18O. So mass in this case is 20, which is slightly higher than 18. Because of this mass difference, the physical characteristics, for example, when evaporation and condensation take place, the different isotopes move in different rates. So what happens during for example, during the evaporation process, the lighter isotopes escape faster compared to heavier isotope. The isotopic ratio, it is very small. That is, if we measure 18O by 16 ratio, it is about 1 by 2000. That means for every 2000 16O, there is only one 18O. So it is a very small amount. However, this can be measured very accurately using machine called mass spectrometer. And this difference is quantified using a symbol called delta, which is defined as the relative difference between the isotopic ratio of a sample with respect to a standard whose isotopic ratio is precisely known. For example, R sample means it is the ratio of 2H by 1H or 18O by 16O. And this difference is very small, so 1000 amplification factor is used to make the number handy. So in any case, delta represents, that is basically the relative difference. So for example, in this case, this figure shows how the isotopic composition of moisture varies. For example, when it evaporates from ocean, if we consider the isotopic values of ocean water as 0 per mil, then the evaporated vapor which is depleted in heavier isotope will have -10. So 0 becomes -10. When this moisture moves inland or it is transported to the high latitude region, it progressively gets depleted in heavier isotopes, because as I mentioned earlier, that condensed phase prefers heavier isotopes. So whenever there is any rainfall event, heavier isotopes will move faster in condensed phase, and lighter isotopes will preferentially remain in the vapor phase. So the vapor gets continuously depleted in heavy isotopes. So in general, what happens when it rains very heavily, the isotopic composition will be less continuously depleted. And this is the basic premise of rainfall reconstructions. So that means heavier the rainfall, lower the isotopic values. And I like to show how it is applied in case of different proxy analysis. This cartoon shows how these the isotopes go into this orange molecule represents the lighter isotopes, or the lighter molecule consisting of 1H, 1H and 16O, and whereas this represents heavier isotopes. So lighter isotopes go faster compared to heavier isotopes, but in the reverse process, the heavier isotopes comes down faster, followed by the lighter isotopes. So that means moisture gets always depleted in heavier isotopes. And this shows a schematic representation of the formation of cave in certain region. When it rains, the rainfall, the rainwater percolates through the bedrock and through various features. It's like this. And the CO2 concentration in the soil, in this soil, is very high, almost 1 to 2 order of magnitude higher than the atmospheric CO2 concentration. So when water percolates through this, it gets slightly acidic, and then this acid reacts with the bedrock in this region. But the CO2 concentration, when it percolates through a cave, for example, which is represented by this line, and if CO2 concentration is relatively lower than that of soil CO2 concentration, then degassing of CO2 will lead to the continuous formation of calcium carbonate deposits, which is shown here by these black markings. So the deposits which hangs from the ceiling is called stalactites, and the ones which rest on the floor is called stalagmites. So these stalactites and stalagmites basically they are calcium carbonate, abygenic calcium carbonate, and they actually carry the signature of isotopic composition of rainfall. So if we assume that in the distant past, let us say about 5,000 years ago, when it rained, and the isotopic composition of rainfall got locked in the isotopic composition of calcium carbonate in these stalactites and stalagmites. Stalagmites is preferred stalactites because of certain advantage. So now one question may be raised that when it rains on a local scale, how the information we retrieve from this proxy, they can be said as a large scale event, or they are representing the large scale processes. Now it is to be noted here that the isotopic values in the rainfall, actually it carries the signature of the moisture. It is not necessarily the signature of the rainfall itself. Since moisture covers a wide region, very wide region, so the isotopic values of this rainfall will carry the signature of the moisture which is occurring on a large scale, and eventually this information, that is isotopic information of rainfall, gets locked in the isotopic composition of carbonate of these kind of samples. Now there are some this map shows the speleothem samples collected all over India, and this is recently published paper in Current Science by these authors. Now I would like to show that some of the speleothem records published by several investigators. For example, this is one of the records made available from a cave in India, which is called Sahiya Cave. This figure shows the anomaly, delta 18 anomaly of speleothem, and the rainfall anomaly, the all India summer monsoon rainfall anomaly. The y-axis of speleothem delta 18 has been plotted on an inverse scale. It's because when it rains heavily, the isotopic composition decreases. So in order to show the increased rainfall, it has been plotted on an inverse scale. So what we see here is that the isotopic anomaly in this case and rainfall anomaly, they show a strong covariation, and since this represents all India rainfall variability, so we can conclusively tell that the isotopic composition of the speleothem is actually carrying the rainfall information over a large scale, and this is not necessarily on the local scale. This again shows the same isotopic plot, and what I like to show here is that how it correlates with the changes in summer monsoon rainfall variability. It is represented by this red line, and the isotopic values of the delta 18 anomaly has been shown by this black line, and we see that there is a very close match between these two time series. Now this is another example of speleothem derived isotopic anomaly from a cave in China, in central China, which is shown here as a white dot. This is the Wanixen cave in southern China, and it shows the various rainfall events. For example, it is known that the medieval warm period experienced higher rainfall, and compared to the period which is known as Little Ice Age. During this time, rainfall was much lower, and what is so here that raw rainfall events increase the isotopic values, which is reflected in this plot very nicely. And now we like to show how another speleothem record from India show a very good resemblance with the delta ethno record of speleothem obtained from this Chinese cave. This is again reported by Sina et al. In this paper, and what they show here is that a close covariation between the delta ethno values of Dandak cave and the delta ethno values of the Chinese cave, which is represented by this orange line. And during this little ice age period, which is represented here in this case, we see that both the values show similar variations, and the increase in value represents the decrease in rainfall during this time period, approximately from 1350 to about 1400 AD. Now, another means of investigating past climate is to do the model simulation. For example, there are various climate models. They are used to understand the climatic variability. Since this method is very different, but the comparison of these two methods with the proxy analysis can provide credence to the analysis based on the proxy data as well as the simulation done by climate models. For example, here it shows the last millennium simulation of Indian monsoon rainfall using different models. So this shows the ensemble of rainfall reconstruction, and this clearly shows that during the medieval warm period the rainfall was higher, and during the little ice age the rainfall was lower, and which match quite well with the proxy observations as I mentioned earlier. This is another work what we like to show here, that one speleothem record from Kadapa in India and another speleothem record in Dongye in Southeast China. They also show very close resemblance in their delta 18O pattern. For example, these high values shown here as shaded, in both the cases they match quite well, and during this time about 2000 to 1880, so both the records show an increasing trend, representing that the coherent behavior of the isotopic values of speleothem over a wide range, which is separated by more than 3000 kilometers. Now I would like to discuss about the proxy records available from the marine environments. There are various kind of samples are used to understand the past climatic conditions. And marine, one of the advantage in marine, particularly marine sediment, is that they provide almost continuous record, and they always represents a large-scale variability, particularly in case of foraminifera. But before that, I would like to discuss about this proxy, which is known as corals. Corals basically live only for a few hundred years, and there are large coral colonies available in India and many other ocean basins, particularly in the equatorial regions. And when they grow, just like treating in terrestrial environment, they form annual bands. And firstly, by getting their chronology and getting other parameters like isotopic values, trace elemental parameters, etc., the paleoceanographers can tell about the physical and chemical behavior of the ocean surface. And various parameters like delta 18O, the isotopic composition of oxygen, isotopic composition of carbon are used. Similarly, this is isotopic composition, boron is used, which is an indicator of past pH condition of the ocean surface. And similarly, various kind of elemental tracers are also used. For example, strontium, calcium, it is widely used to reconstruct the temperature conditions. Now, the delta 18O of these carbonate samples is a function of two parameters. One is the sea surface temperature, another one is the delta atino of water. And because of this dependability on two variables, it is not directly possible to infer about temperature change. So dual proxy analysis is done to decouple these two effects. For example, strontium calcium, it depends on the temperature through its distribution coefficients. When strontium is incorporated in coral calcium carbonate, it is mainly driven by distribution coefficient, which is a function only of temperature, and it is independent of seawater chemistry. So if both the parameters are measured, that is strontium calcium, it will give the temperature information, and delta atino will give both the information, then it is in principle possible to reconstruct the past temperature as well as delta atino of water. Delta atino of water is basically related to salinity, because both these parameters are governed by similar processes. For example, when water evaporates, the lighter isotopes will escape faster, making the remaining water enriched in heavier isotopes. At the same time, because of the evaporation, salinity will increase, particularly in the surface ocean. So delta atino of water and sea surface salinity will have a strong positive correlations. So by analyzing this dual proxies, it is possible to reconstruct delta atino of water and in turn the salinity. So this way it is possible to get the water influx, particularly due to river discharge, etc., in a given oceanic region. So here I would like to show one example. This is reported by Sagar et al., who have collected coral samples from Lakshadweep in Arabian Sea, and they have analyzed strontium calcium ratio in this coral, and they show that these, particularly in this figure, they plot the SST derived from strontium calcium ratio of corals, and the SST observed SST analysis, and they show that there is a very good match between the observed temperature and the reconstructed temperature based on coral strontium calcium analysis. This is another example to show how the coral oxygen isotopes may be used to reconstruct the summer monsoon rainfall variability over India. In this case, what is done here is that the link between El Nino and Indian monsoon is used. It is well known that during the El Nino time, the monsoon intensity is less. And because of this dependency, the corals growing in the equatorial Pacific region is expected to have more potential than the corals growing in the equatorial Indian Ocean region. So the basic principle is that it has been shown that the tropospheric temperature difference, that means temperature over this box over India, in northern and one northern box and one southern box. This is the area, and temperature is calculated over this box up to within the high duration of 600 hectopascal to 200 hectopascal region. So the temperature difference between these two boxes, when plotted on a monthly time scale, it has been shown that they are negative during the time of before monsoon, and during the monsoon time it is positive, and again they become negative. So this actually, according to these authors, the tropospheric temperature difference actually drives the monsoon rainfall. it is not exactly the land ocean temperature gradient, but it is the temperature gradient slightly above the surface, that is up to 600 hectopascal to 200 hectopascal level. So this temperature gradient, when it is high, when it is positive, so this becomes positive during the summer monsoon season. So using this concept, the delta 1800 of corals growing in the Pacific region could be used to reconstruct the summer monsoon rainfall in India. For example, this plot shows the delta 1800 of corals. These two coral records obtained from the equatorial Pacific region, and they showed strong association with the summer monsoon rainfall over India. So using this concept, has been possible to reconstruct the monsoon rainfall, and the comparison has been shown in this plot. For example, the black bars represent the coral derived all India summer monsoon rainfall, and the gray bars represents the actual measurements. So we see that there is a very close resemblance between these two records. And using a fossil coral record, it has been possible to reconstruct the monsoon rainfall during the period of 1630 to 1700. And what we see here is that during the early phase of this reconstruction period, the mean monsoon was about 916 millimeter per year, with a higher variability about 41.3. But during the later part of this period, the mean monsoon rainfall was 932 millimeter with a lower variability about 25.5. So this way, it may be possible that to use the corals from the Pacific region to reconstruct the rainfall variability over India. Now I like to show some example of the foraminiferal studies. So as mentioned earlier, that Foraminifera, it is a tiny creature which many of them live on the ocean surface. Their lifetime is only about 2 to 3 weeks, and when they form the calcium carbonate, their shell, the isotopic composition in their cell, it actually inherits the temperature information of the ambient water. So another parameter that controls their isotopic value, as mentioned earlier, is the isotopic composition of seawater. Now there are two different kind of foraminifera. The one which lives on the ocean surface is called planktic foraminifera, and the one which lives at the bottom is called the benthic foraminifera. And benthic foraminifera, it is basically independent of temperature, simply because the deep ocean temperature does not vary much with time, so it remains more or less constant. But deep ocean will be affected by the so-called the ice volume effect. So when on a glacial interglacial time scale, when water evaporates and goes to the polar region, the sea level drops, and as a result, the sea surface gets enriched in heavier isotopes, that is 18O. So during a glacial period, the foraminifera which is flourishing, so they will have higher delta 18O values. But during the glacial time, when the ice melts from the polar region and they return to the sea, so the isotopic values will be low. So the foraminiferal species which grow during this interglacial period, they will have lower isotopic values. So this way, if a sediment core is collected from suitable region, and then foraminiferal species are collected across these cores, and if they are dated by means of radiocarbon or other means of dating systematics, then a continuous record of delta 18O and other parameters can be retrieved from the sediment cores. And these records are used to decipher about the climatic changes. In this case, these authors, they collected one sediment core from this in the Bay of Bengal, western part of Bay of Bengal region, and they have reconstructed from this delta. They have measured both delta 18O and trace metal analysis. So by means of this dual analysis, they have been able to reconstruct the SST anomaly using these two records. So this red line shows the SST anomaly based on their analysis of their foraminiferal records of this core, and this shows the delta 18O anomaly of this foraminiferal record. And what they show, according to this author, is that this record, they show a very good resemblance with the delta 18O of the Sahia cave, which I have discussed earlier. So what happens when during the periods of very heavy rainfall, the isotopic composition of surface water will be depleted, and this signature then will be captured by the foraminiferal species. So during a low rainfall conditions, so it will be relatively enriched. So we can get an idea about when rainfall was high and when rainfall was low based on the analysis of these plantic foraminifera. So this has been shown here, and according to these authors, so they have their records show a very strong resemblance with the isotopic record of speleothem, which is coming from the terrestrial environment, and there is this good match and shows the strong coherence between the marine records and the terrestrial records. Now this is another work done by Saraswat et al. So these authors, they collected sediment core from Arabian Sea in this region, and what they like to study is that what was the behavior of the climatic behavior during the deglaciation time, that is last deglaciation. We know that the last glacier maximum was about 20,000 years ago, when southwest monsoon rainfall was weak, but northeast monsoon was stronger compared to today. But based on the speleothem analysis from different regions, it was hypothesized that the monsoon during this time underwent very rapid fluctuations. So this is based on speleothem analysis from China and other places. So these authors wanted to test this hypothesis using a marine record, as mentioned earlier. So in this case, so they have analyzed both delta 18O of a foraminiferal species called G. ruber, and they have done barium calcium measurements, and they have also done magnesium calcium measurements. And as I mentioned earlier, like strontium calcium ratio, magnesium calcium ratio is also used to infer about the temperature conditions. So based on this trace metal analysis, the SST was reconstructed for this time period up to about 30,000 years before present. So in this case, this the low temperature at approximately about 18 to 19,000 years ago represents the initiation of the deglaciation. But when this is compared with the delta 18O of Ruber, this is the independent measurements. This is trace element measurement, and this is isotopic measurements. So though the patterns are very similar, but there is a phase lag. Delta 18O minimum was achieved something about 16,000 years. So there is a lag about roughly about 2,000 years. And this is also seen to some extent in barium calcium measurements. So the difference of this time arises because of their sensitivity, since and delta 18 sensitivity exactly is not same that the sensitivity of the trace method analysis. For example, it has been proposed that this kind of sudden changes were triggered by the ice rafting events in the North Atlantic region. So because of these different sensitivities, so these proxies show some kind of difference in the results. Nevertheless, a broad match in their pattern reveals that this indeed happened, and this kind of high fluctuations, it represents that there was fluctuations in SST and as well, which is also reflected in the fluctuation in the rainfall variability. Now, I would like to discuss a little bit about more terrestrial proxies like lake sediments. This represents the lakes and what are the different inputs they receive. For example, inputs come from the atmospheric environment. It is also received from the by the watersheds, and it also gets component from the groundwater flow. So there are two kind of main two kind of components are the allochthonous components and autochthonous components. So these allochthonous materials, they are produced outside the lake, and eventually they are carried by different elements into the lake. And allochthonous materials, they are in situ production. So analysis of different kind of proxies provide information of both the processes. For example, isotopic analysis is carried out, carbon isotopic, oxygen isotopic, and nitrogen isotopics are carried out of different proxies like ostracot cells, snails, and mollusks, etc. And then the orthogenic calcite, it means the calcite when it forms in situ, that is, it is kind of allochthonous materials. It actually represents the evaporative conditions. When evaporation is very high, that is during the low rainfall regime, the isotopic composition will be higher, particularly the oxygen isotopic composition will be higher. And during this time, that is during the dry phase, a particular mineral called galusite is formed. So if delta 18 is high and the evidence of galusite minerals are found, then this can be very conclusively one can tell that this is a dry phase. So this figure shows how during an algal bloom, how CO2 is derived from the atmosphere, and then through some chemical processes, the calcium carbonate, that is orthogenic carbonates, are formed. And as I mentioned earlier, this is again a function of temperature and the delta 18 of water. Now, one of the examples has been reported by Prasad et al. So these authors collected lake sediment from a central Indian lake called Lonar, which is situated here, and they have retrieved almost last 10 to 11,000 years of climatic history, especially belonging to the core monsoon zone of India. So they have analyzed different proxies, for example, delta 13C of carbonate and delta 18O of the same carbonate, and they have analyzed C by N ratio. C by N ratio is a very good indicator of the input of terrestrial input of terrigenous materials into the lake system. So by doing multi-proxy analysis, it is possible to infer about the climatic changes. So one of their interesting findings of this result is that during this just after the mid-Holocene, that is about 5.5 4 to about 4,000 years ago, there was a very drastic change took place in delta 13C of carbonate. As I mentioned earlier, that during an evaporative regime, the isotopic composition will be enriched. So according to these authors, this enrichment in delta 13C and based on other parameters also, they infer that this was dry phase. So this yellow line or this orange shading represents appearance of dry phase, and here is also another period that is something about 2.5 to about 0.5 kilo year ago. Another dry phase has been identified. Now it is known that during the mid-Holocene time, the monsoon was stronger compared to today, and it is widely believed that this mid-Holocene intensification of monsoon was caused by the increased summer insolation. So during this time, despite having higher insolation values, how it was possible to have drought effect? So these authors argue that it was not driven by insolation, but actually it was driven by the climatic conditions controlled by the Indian Ocean warm pool, IPWP. And during this time, because of this effect of this Indian Ocean warm pool, the meridional circulation was perturbed and the water circulation also perturbed, and as a result, the monsoon rainfall was deficient, and this arid period happened during this time period. Now, I would like to show another example of the use of isotopic composition of tree rings, which could be used to reconstruct the soil water isotopic composition in the past time scales. It is known that the isotopic composition of tree ring cellulose, it reflects the isotopic composition of water. Since tree gets its water mainly from the soil, and soil water is mainly derived from the rainwater, so essentially the isotopic composition of soil water carries the isotopic signature of rainfall, which subsequently gets recorded in the isotopic values of cellulose. So in this work, this what has been shown here, the isotopic composition of this is delta 18O. Actually SW means soil water. So delta 18O was high. So this rate marks indicates the high values of delta 18O, and this represents the all India's monsoon variability from the published record, and it is shown that the high isotopic values are this goes well with the low rainfall events. So that means during the deficient rainfall years, the isotopic composition of soil water was enriched, which has been reflected or recorded in the isotopic composition of in the cellulose. So this is an example how the isotopic composition of tree rings could be used to reconstruct the past soil water condition. Similarly, in another example, the carbon isotopic composition in cellulose has been used to reconstruct the PCO2 past PCO2 variability. So far, there is only one record, the only archive, that is the ice core, which is used to reconstruct the CO2 past CO2 concentrations, and in this way it has been possible to measure the CO2 concentration over a period of last 800,000 years. But these ice cores are available only in the polar region, that is South Poles and North Poles. And an ice core from the Himalayan region cannot be used for this kind of purpose. So there is a very limitations in having the proxy records from other regions, from the equatorial or high latitude region. So in this record, it has been hypothesized that the carbon isotopic values of tree rings could be used to reconstruct the CO2 past CO2 concentration. And these two records obtained from the Western Himalayan region, and it has been used to get the past CO2 conditions, which is shown in this in red line, and green line indicates the past CO2 value, which was extended until about 1920. And this dotted line represents the PCO2 values obtained from the ice core analysis, and it was averaged for 20 years, and a good match was found between the ice core values and the tree ring derived PCO2 values. So this is the same analysis which has been extended tree ring records from across the globes, and so tree ring records from these sites, so they have been using the same model to get the PCO2 values, and we see here that there is a good match between the derived PCO2 values among themselves, as well as with the PCO2 obtained from the ice core results. So I would like to stop here, and if there is any question, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Supriyo. That is a very fundamental talk, starting from very basics, so anyone can understand the very complex science of paleoclimate. So we do have some questions. I will post it to you.
Yes.
Please read the question and answer that.
Yes. Yes, so there are some questions. First, I'll read the questions and then I'll try to answer. The question one is, what is the smallest periodicity of events that can be measured by tree rings? This is an interesting question, and actually this depends on the resolution what we get from tree ring analysis. Generally, from tree ring we can get annual information, that is annual climatic information on an annual scale. So it is possible to get events like El Nino, which happens in about 2 to 5 year time scales. So tree ring is ideal for getting this interannual variability. Then question 2 is, which is superior in paleoclimate studies, tree rings or stalactites and stalagmites? There is, if we compare these two results, that may not be a very ideal comparison, because tree ring provides annual scale resolutions, whereas speleothem usually provides interannual time scales. But tree ring provides only information about few hundred years to up to about 1,000 years. Of course, some tree rings are there. For example, bristlecone pine, they can go as long as up to 4,000 years. And by combining several tree rings using modern and paleo, it has been possible to extend the results only up to about 11,000 years. But speleothem analysis, it can go to several tens of thousands of years. So it is not the question of superiority, it depends on the scientific questions that we address. So accordingly, one has to choose which proxy to be used. Question 3. Comparing two cave samples of speleothems, how practical it is when the sediment properties of two regions are totally different. This is also a pertinent question. It does matter the sediment content, because as I mentioned earlier, when the rainwater it percolates, it reacts with the bedrocks, and then when the carbonate is formed, this information gets locked in their isotopic composition. So it very much depends on the chemical compositions of the two regions. But so there it is not that always these two records or multiple records match very well. We also do see some kind of discrepancies. So these discrepancies may be arising due to the local effects or the non-climatic effects. So one has to make sure what could be the reasons for that, and accordingly the results can be interpreted. Next question is, how the modern day anthropogenic forcing affects the records that get trapped into paleo indicators such as tree rings, speleothem, etc. for the next 100 to 200 years. This is an interesting question. We know that many the anthropogenic activities do affect various environmental processes, and then eventually they get locked in this such kind of natural archives. So for example, the burning of this fossil fuel, which is increasing the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, and then this increase in atmospheric CO2 concentration will affect the isotopic values. For example, in case of carbon isotopic values in tree rings, and then it has been shown that how the radiocarbon analysis is used to infer about the anthropogenic emitted CO2. So one of our works, we have shown that in the central Indian region, the isotopic values, particularly the radiocarbon 14C12C ratio, was significantly lower than the expected value which is found in the similar latitude belt. And we have interpreted this in terms of anthropogenic emission, because the tree ring sample was collected in Thane, which belongs to a highly industrialized area. So this way, anthropogenic processes or these events could be recorded in natural samples, and in future one can definitely extract those information by analyzing these proxy samples. Next question is, what is the highest temporal resolution of rainfall reconstruction possible from any proxy data? This is also a very interesting question, and this depends on what kind of proxies are used. For example, as I mentioned, speleothems can be used mainly on internal timescales. Of course, with improved technology, it is now being possible to get almost annual resolution. So in that case, annual scale rainfall may be possible to derive from speleothems. But some authors, they have shown that if you analyze the so-called freshwater shell, like mollusk, which live only about couple of years, and they can record the rainfall variation on intra-seasonal timescales. That is, or rather I can say seasonal timescales. Since their growth rate is very high, so they can in principle record the low rainfall and high rainfall events in their carbonate cell. So in this way, but their lifetime is very small, and since it is not possible to date exactly, because every dating system has some error, so we can get a window of period during which time we can say that in a particular season monsoon rainfall was low or it was high based on this analysis. So using this technique, it is in principle possible to get information on seasonal timescales.
Thank you, Dr. Supriyo. You have answered all the questions. Thank you very much. And thank you for your valuable time to spend with us in MOES webinar. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, now we can go offline.
Okay.